The maps on the wall of the Pentagon's intelligence briefing room tell a story that nobody in Washington wants to say out loud yet. 2 American carrier strike groups closing on the same theater simultaneously. 300 U.S. military aircraft repositioned into CENTCOM. Patriot and THAAD batteries quietly moved into forward positions across the Gulf. And in the background, behind the diplomatic language of scheduled talks and carefully worded ultimatums, and satellite imagery arriving every 48 hours, showing Iran doing something it was never supposed to do after June 2025. It is rebuilding, faster than anyone predicted, deeper than before. The clock that Operation Midnight Hammer was supposed to stop is running again. This is not posturing. When the USS Gerald R. leaves the Caribbean fresh off combat operations and crosses the Atlantic to join the USS Abraham Lincoln already positioned in the Arabian Sea, that is not a scheduled exercise. That is the United States moving its 2 most powerful conventional military instruments into the same geographic theater at the same time. You do not do that to send a diplomatic note. You do that when every other instrument has already been tried. Everyone following this crisis believes they understand the situation. America struck Iran's nuclear sites in June 2025 and set the program back by years. The threat was contained. Trump declared victory. The centrifuges were gone. They are wrong. Not wrong about what happened, wrong about what it meant. Operation Midnight Hammer destroyed infrastructure. It did not destroy intention, and intention once formed over 40 years of institutional commitment does not sit beneath 200 feet of reinforced concrete waiting to be excavated by a bunker buster. It moves to the next tunnel. It trains the next generation of engineers. It rebuilds methodically under the cover of diplomatic engagement, while the world watches the negotiations and ignores the satellite imagery. By February 2026, Iran had not just repaired the damage. It had hardened against a second strike, backfilling tunnel entrances at Isfahan with packed earth, rebuilding centrifuge halls with deeper overhead cover, fortifying Pickaxe Mountain against the specific munitions that penetrated it the first time. This is what an adversary looks like when it has studied your weapon system and concluded it can outlast your patience. Here is the question that actually sits at the center of this crisis. Does Phase 2 finish what Phase 1 started, or does striking Iran a second time, harder and deeper, produce something more dangerous than the program it was supposed to eliminate? That is what we are going to break down. The strike architecture, the retaliation math, the economic fuse, and the question that 2 carriers and 300 aircraft cannot answer. Drop the keyword Phase 2 in the comments right now. Let's build this together. 3 constraints define the operational envelope for everything that follows. First, the target has hardened. After June 2025, Iran did not simply repair, it adapted. Tunnel entrances that guided the GBU-57 to their targets have been redesigned. Underground pathways have been deepened. The engineering lessons of Midnight Hammer were absorbed within weeks and immediately applied to every facility that survived. A second strike faces a harder version of the same problem with a depleted stockpile of the weapon designed to solve it. The Pentagon restocked GBU-57 production after June 2025, but the lead time is measured in months, not days. Second, the retaliation architecture exists and is loaded. In the 12-day Israel-Iran war of June 2025, Iran fired an estimated 550 ballistic missiles and over 1,000 one-way attack drones against Israeli territory. Against a U.S. strike, those same missiles would be aimed at targets that cannot move. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the 5th Fleet Headquarters in Bahrain, Al Tanf in Jordan, every fixed American installation across a region where the United States has tens of thousands of personnel. Third, the economic lever. The Strait of Hormuz carries approximately 20% of the world's traded oil through a waterway 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Iran does not need to sink a ship to weaponize that geography. It needs only to credibly threaten to mine it. Insurance markets collapse within hours. tanker transits halt within days. Oil price spikes that no central bank in Europe or Asia has the reserves to absorb follow within weeks. Strip this entire situation to its three-part structure. The hammer: 2 carriers, 300 aircraft, 7 B-2s, hundreds of Tomahawks, and EA-18G Growlers in Jordan ready to blind Iran's air defense grid. Everything needed to reduce Iran's nuclear infrastructure to rubble is in position. The clock: Iran's reconstitution speed. The 8 months between Midnight Hammer and February 2026 produced not just repairs, but architectural evolution. The same engineers who built the original facilities studied the exact failure modes the 2025 strikes exploited and hardened against them. Striking again resets the clock. It does not destroy it. The fuse: Iran's proxy network, Hezbollah, Iraqi Shia militias, Houthi forces in Yemen. A U.S. strike does not produce one war. It triggers a simultaneous detonation across every front where Iranian influence has spent 20 years building exactly this contingency. The strike sequence, as analysts across 3 separate defense think tanks have now mapped it, begins not with bombs, but with silence. The EA-18G Growlers, 6 of them repositioned to Al Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan, go active 40 minutes before any strike aircraft crosses into Iranian airspace. Their mission is not to destroy radars. It is to blind them. The ALQ-99 jamming pods aboard each Growler broadcast across the full frequency band of Iran's Russian-supplied S-300 and Bavar 373 air defense systems, degrading the radar picture from precise targeting data to electronic noise. In the window that creates, measured in minutes, not hours, the F-35s from the USS Abraham Lincoln enter Iranian airspace through the gaps in border coverage that the Growlers have just opened. The F-35s carry JSOW glide munitions and JDAM precision-guided bombs against air defense nodes, radar installations, and the command and control infrastructure that threads Iran's layered defense network together. Their job is not to strike the nuclear sites. Their job is to ensure nothing can shoot at the aircraft that will. They do not announce themselves. Iran's surviving radar operators, working through the jamming fog, see fragments, contacts that appear and dissolve, tracks that cannot be held long enough to hand off to a missile battery. By the time Iran's ground controllers fully understand the scope of what is happening, the F/A-18S from both carriers are already inbound on their strike packages. The F/A-18 Super Hornets carry 2 roles simultaneously. The first wave hits ballistic missile storage facilities, launch infrastructure, and the IRGC command nodes that would coordinate the retaliation. This is the counterforce layer, not to prevent all Iranian missiles from flying, but to reduce the number that do. The second wave sustains pressure, cycling through strike packages around the clock, maintaining the operational tempo that prevents Iran from recovering, regrouping, or moving assets to secondary locations it has pre-surveyed for exactly this scenario. And then, from somewhere over the Indian Ocean, the sound that precedes nothing, because nothing is louder than a B-2 flying at altitude. 7 B-2, Spirit stealth bombers, each carrying 2 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, begin their terminal runs on the targets that nothing else in the American arsenal can reach. Fordo, buried under 300 feet of mountain at Qom. The reconstituted halls at Natanz, the hardened tunnels at Isfahan that Iran spent 8 months reinforcing specifically against this weapon. The GBU-57 finds the new entrance geometry and descends anyway. Iran's response does not wait for the B-2s to land. The first ballistic missiles leave their silos within minutes of the initial Growler activation, a launch-on-warning protocol the IRGC has rehearsed for a decade. The targets are fixed, pre-surveyed, and have been in Iranian targeting computers since before the 2025 strikes. Al Udeid Air Base, 10,000 American personnel, the largest U.S. air base in the Middle East. the 5th Fleet headquarters at Manama, Bahrain, Al-Tanf garrison in southern Syria. The Patriot batteries the U.S. quietly repositioned in January and February. 2026 begin their intercept sequences. Some missiles are killed cleanly, others are not. Simultaneously, the proxy architecture activates. Iraqi militias with Iranian-supplied short-range ballistic missiles begin engaging U.S. bases in Iraq. Houthi forces in Yemen, already combat-experienced from 18 months of Red Sea operations, fire anti-ship missiles at the destroyer screen protecting both carrier groups. Hezbollah's rocket arsenal, partially reconstituted since 2024, points north into Israel, forcing the IDF into a defensive posture that diverts air support from any joint operations. The United States is not fighting one war. It is simultaneously managing 6 separate military problems across a geographic area the size of Europe, while sustaining continuous strike operations against a country that has spent 30 years building an asymmetric retaliation architecture for exactly this moment. The arithmetic of this engagement has one brutal feature that American planners acknowledge in every honest assessment. Iran cannot win a conventional exchange with 2 U.S. carrier strike groups and 300 CENTCOM aircraft. That is settled physics. What it can do is impose costs, in munitions expended, in bases damaged, in personnel killed, in political capital consumed, that make the strategic calculus of completing a sustained campaign progressively harder with every week it continues. The 2025 Midnight Hammer strikes exhausted a significant portion of the U.S. GBU-57 stockpile. A sustained Phase 2 campaign burns through Tomahawk reserves, AMRAAM stocks, and precision-guided munition inventories at rates that Politico noted earlier this week already have planners concerned about sustainment timelines. Iran is not trying to defeat the American military. It is trying to make the American military expensive enough that domestic and international pressure ends the campaign before the job is finished. June 22, 2025. 7B. 2. Spirit stealth bombers fly the longest mission in B-2 history, 30 hours from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, around 2 continents into Iranian airspace. 14 GBU-57 bunker busters fall on Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. 125 U.S. aircraft participate in total. Trump declares Iran's nuclear program obliterated. It is the first real-world use of the 30,000-pound massive ordnance penetrator in combat. By any measure, it is an extraordinary demonstration of American military reach and precision. 8 months later, those satellite images arrive showing fresh construction at Natanz. Soil packed into tunnel entrances at Isfahan to defeat the exact penetration geometry the GBU-57 exploited. New buildings rising at facilities that were craters in July. The 2025 strikes did not end the program. They gave Iran's engineers a syllabus. This is not theory. This is what February 2026 looks like from a satellite. The weapon that makes Phase 2 possible is the GBU-57A/B Massive Ordnance Penetrator. Picture it. 20 feet long, 30,000 pounds, guided by GPS, released from a B-2 at altitude. Its outer casing is hardened steel designed to survive the first layers of earth and concrete intact. It punches through the surface, uses sequential warhead detonation to drive deeper, and detonates at a calculated depth where the overpressure is maximized against the buried structure. It is designed to penetrate 200 feet of reinforced concrete before its main charge fires. Against Fordo, built under a mountain at Qom, at depths that conventional bunker busters never reach, the GBU-57 is the only American weapon that arrives with a credible probability of functional destruction. There is no alternative. There is no second option. If the GBU-57 does not reach the target survives. Iran knows this, which is why the 8 months since Midnight Hammer were spent hardening every entrance geometry the GBU-57 depends on to maintain its terminal trajectory. Phase 2 hits a harder target with the same weapon, the margin of error has narrowed. Somewhere in this equation are the people who do not appear in any briefing slide. At Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, over 10,000 American military personnel woke up in January on what their orders described as a routine CENTCOM rotation. By February, they are inside the targeting envelope of an adversary that has already demonstrated the willingness and capability to fire 550 ballistic missiles in a single conflict. They understand the geometry. They do their jobs. They call home less frequently than they would like. That is the real system. Not the carriers, not the B-2s, not the Growlers. The people who maintain those machines, fly those missions, and live inside the blast radius of the decision being made in a room they will never enter. So, does Phase 2 finish what Phase 1 started? The infrastructure answer is yes. 2 carriers, 300 aircraft, and 7 B-2s carrying the only weapon capable of reaching the deepest Iranian facilities can reduce the physical program to rubble again, more thoroughly than before. The decision answer is no. You cannot crater a decision. The 2025 strikes proved this with a precision that satellite imagery has now documented in detail. Iran absorbed the most powerful non-nuclear conventional strike in American history, studied what it could not protect against, rebuilt what it could, and hardened what remained. A second strike resets the timeline, the institutional knowledge, the engineering competence, the 40-year commitment that produced a program capable of surviving Midnight Hammer. None of that is underground. None of it is vulnerable to a bunker buster. The Situation Room question is not whether Phase 2 can be executed. The carriers in the Mediterranean and the Arabian Sea answer that question without needing to be asked. The Situation Room question is what the region looks like on day 31 when the campaign has consumed half the Tomahawk stockpile. Iran's proxies have activated across 6 fronts. The Strait of Hormuz insurance market has collapsed, and Tehran is already moving centrifuges to locations the satellite imagery has not yet found. 2 carriers can start that campaign. What ends it is a different question entirely, one that nobody in Washington has answered yet. Tell me below, is there a Phase 2 endgame that actually works, or does this campaign begin knowing it cannot finish what it starts?